Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking with ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones about how to find a job outside of the OCI process. Your Law School Toolbox host is Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together with the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking with ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones about how to find a job outside of the OCI process. So welcome, Sadie.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. All right. So say somebody is struck out at OCI, or maybe they just never did it to start with. How are they going to find a job?
There are lots of ways to find a job outside of OCI. That's just a, very specific process that, does make it easier. But I think that there are lots of options for other ways.
Yeah. And I think one thing to keep in mind is realistically, this is actually what most people have to do. So if you are feeling sorry for yourself and you're feeling like all of your classmates got jobs and it was so easy for them, the real reality is most people do not get their jobs through OCI, so you are not alone. And there are definitely a lot of options, and you will almost certainly find something eventually.
Absolutely. I think it's just about having a plan. Right. Also, in the real world, after all of this stuff, you're going to have to look for jobs in other ways also. So OCI does seem sort of like everything's neatly tied with a bow. But that's just not the way it's going to work going forward, and it's not the way it usually works.
I think that's a great point. Most people in the world do not have a bunch of firms just show up and present them with jobs, and that will never happen again, even if it happened once for you. So even if you found your job through OCI and you're thinking this does not apply to you, and you can tune out now if you even opened this episode, you might want to listen, because actually you're probably not going to have that job forever. I mean, if you think that you're going to, I'm the sorry voice of reality, which says most likely, statistically speaking, you will be searching for other jobs in the future.
Yeah, so I think these tips are good, for anyone looking for any job.
I agree. And through this, we're actually going to work through a framework that was developed by a friend of ours named Katie Slater, who at the time was a lawyer turned career coach. Unfortunately, for everyone who wants her help, she does not do that anymore. But she has this great framework on the Girls Guide to Law School website that we're going to talk about, because I think it's actually really helpful. So what she talks about when you're thinking about, getting a job in, what we could really call the normal way, where you actually have to go out and find one, you need a plan that you're going to attack this from multiple levels. And you may be doing all of these at the same time, or you may be doing them sequentially, but these are kind of the things that you need to do. So, and we'll talk about each one of these in detail. But the first level is developing the big picture view about yourself, what you want, and what you can offer to employers that they might need. So you can imagine like a Venn diagram. Here are the things I want. Here are the things employers are looking at. Where do those things overlap? You need to have that kind of level of detail before you can make a convincing case. Now, the second level is tactical. So what are the concrete steps that you need to do to get this job? So there it may be things like, networking, applying for jobs. How are you going to stay organized? All these kind of things. And then the third level, which I think is often overlooked, but is really important, is just being aware of the mental and emotional toll that this process can take on you and finding ways to proactively combat that. So, if you're going into your 3L year, you might spend the majority of that year looking for a job, and that can be really stressful. And I think just, noticing that and having tools to deal with it can be very helpful. Do you generally agree that this is a good way of looking at it?
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of people might just kind of do the middle step,
right?
Which is, what do I need to do to get there? And that's what I hear a lot. But I think that this is all really important, because you should take a minute to sort of figure out, what are you looking for? What are the reasons? Where do you fit in? What's right for you? It's not just about necessarily finding a job at any cost. And then the other thing, I think, especially in the third step, is there might be a lot of rejection involved.
Yes.
On different levels, because, not hearing back from somebody is going to feel like rejection. And, a lot of these, resumes you're going to send out are going to get no's. So I think just kind of preparing yourself for that, it's going to be maybe a long process and you're going to be hearing no a lot and you have to keep going.
Right.
So I think that all of this stuff is important, and not just, how many resumes do I send out?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think a lot of times people skip that first step and they say, well, I just need a job. And the reality is you're not going to be a super convincing candidate for any job if you're willing to just say, I'll take any job. It's like, well, okay. I mean, are you qualified to be a barista after going to law school? It's like you're not, just because you graduate from law school doesn't qualify you to do like these very specific types of things. So let's talk about, that big picture view. So what are some things people should be thinking about here when they're looking at, okay, I'm going to take a step back and kind of figure out what makes the most sense for me?
Well, I think you need to look at your own strengths and what skills you have, and what areas, you specifically want to work in, and, what is going to work for you in terms of where you're going to be successful. So, there are people who just think that BigLaw is, the end all be all and the pinnacle of everything. But that environment and that situation might not be right for everybody, even if, you have the grades, or it's something that you are able to do. I think you have to think about where you're going to be successful based on, your personality, where you've done well before, where you haven't done well before, what types of people, different areas are going to attract, how stressful it's going to be. Because like you said, just saying you'll take any job probably isn't going to make you successful long-term in that job. And that's what I think, you should be thinking about.
I completely agree with that. I mean, I think even just within, what type of work environment are you looking at? Do you want some place that's like super high powered and a lot of stress and a lot of prestige, or would you be happier at a smaller place, probably, with less stuff going on? Do you want to be in court? Do you not want to be in court? Do you want to do like different types of work? Like there's so many different ways you can be a lawyer that just saying like, I want a legal job is not that helpful. I think you can say you're not sure, like, well, I just don't know what I want to do. You've got to really do that examination of what classes did you like? What did you find interesting? What did you do well in? Of the jobs that you've had, what specific pieces of those jobs did you like or not like? And, how can you do more of that or less of that? And when you're thinking about your strength and your skills, sometimes I feel like people can get beaten down a bit by law school and they think, oh, I just don't have anything to offer to the world. So if you're feeling that way and you feel like law school kind of has beaten you down, just go back to before law school when you thought you were a successful person. And what were your strengths and your skills then? You came into law school with certain things you were good at. What are those things? Maybe there's a way, say that you are feeling beaten down by the law school experience. Maybe there's a way that you can use those previous skills, whatever they are, and strengths in a legal career. So, maybe you're not like, the strongest analytical person you've realized, but you're really good at something like project management. There may be other careers in the legal field that can be a lot better fit than just trying to like beat your head against the wall to become like, a kind of traditional lawyer.
Absolutely. I think that this is just a crucial step. I also think like law school a lot of times pushes you towards litigation.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of law students come through who clearly would do better with transactional work, and that fits in, and they don't even know what it is or what's involved.
No, I think
they're scared of what's going to be involved in being a litigator. So I think sort of being open-minded and trying to figure out what different things really are, because I think it's like just picking a law school based on like the rankings,
right,
and just saying this is the best, so I need to go there. I think it's sort of the same thing in terms of jobs, having this idea like this is the best, and it's not about the best and what outside people think. It's about what is the best for you and what is going to work for you and your life. How many hours is it? Yeah, how much are you going to work?
What's going to make you fulfilled going to work and let you work a reasonable amount of time? The other thing, too, is sometimes people forget that these things that you did or that you knew before law school can actually be a great asset to a job. So, if you had a career before or you had studied different things, this is kind of the time to think about, well, do you want to try to combine that with your legal experience? Because then you can position yourself as a more unique applicant than somebody who doesn't have those skills.
Definitely.
All right. So we've done our self-analysis. We have a pretty clear idea. Like, you can tell your story. Again, you need your elevator pitch. I think we have some posts and podcasts we can link to on this, but you need a, succinct version of what are you looking for? Why are you looking for it? That kind of thing. So once you have that story and you can talk about it, it's time really, I think, to pull in your contacts. What do you think about this?
Yes, I think that's definitely the place to start. And I think when you start doing that, you might realize that there's all of these people you hadn't really thought about.
Yeah. And so Katie had some advice around that. She said basically, like, you want to create a list of basically everybody you know, and then organize that list into separate categories based on the type of information and opportunities that you might need from them. And I think this is a really useful way of looking at it, because sometimes people get so focused in on just like their legal contacts, and the world of people that you could be talking to about this job search is actually much broader. So you may have people that you want to do informational interviews with. People could be sources for jobs. People may be support and like providing you with sort of analysis of yourself, so that, old family friends may have ideas that you haven't thought of, that kind of thing. And then there may be people who know of opportunities. So this is where like your loose network comes into play. So your strong connections are people that you might like talk about this with. And of course, they're going to try to help, but inevitably their networks are limited. So people actually, studies have shown, tend to find jobs through the looser network of connections, because those people have a whole separate area that they can connect you into. So I think you want to be thinking about this broadly, not just like, oh, what law school professor could I talk to? Because they may have 10 students coming to them asking for help, but somebody that, your family knows or something may not have anybody.
Mm-hmm. And I hear a lot from students saying things like, oh, well, my parents aren't lawyers. There aren't other lawyers in my family, so I really don't have much to go on.
Right.
And that's just, most of the time, even if one of your parents is a lawyer, it's not necessarily going to lead to a job.
Right.
So I think that you definitely need to sort of step back and look more broadly, because I bet that there, are different paths to go on.
Yeah, and I have another series on the Girls Guide site written by a friend of mine who realized, speaking of litigation, she did not actually enjoy conflict. And she wanted to stop being a litigator, but she still wanted to work in a legal role. And so she took some time and she went to a career coach. She tried different things, but how she ended up actually getting the job that she got that she really liked was someone, I think it was like her uncle or her great uncle or something, was at a dinner and started talking to somebody, and then they started chatting, and he realized like, oh, this might be a good person for my niece to talk with. Just one of those super random things. Like, he's not a lawyer. He doesn't know lawyers. He's just chatting it up at, the dinner table. And that's how she got the job.
So, and I think that's so important. Let people know if you're looking for a job.
Yeah.
Because you never know where that's going to come up, down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think when you're thinking about this, you obviously can't reach out to like hundreds of people at once. It probably doesn't really make sense. So you've got to make a plan, right? So do you have any ideas about, how people can kind of approach this?
Well, I think that there's, lots of ways to start with your networking. I think that starting with LinkedIn is a great way. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of see in the, directly showing people's jobs, where your network goes. And I think you definitely need to keep track of it, in as we've talked about before, a spreadsheet, a Trello board, whatever, form you do it in. So you need to make sure that you're sort of keeping track of where, these different people and who you've reached out to. So LinkedIn, I guess, is the more, starting with career. But then also, we'll have personal contacts and things like that.
Right. Yeah, I think the keeping track piece is so important. I mean, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good to reach out to all these people and then drop the ball. If somebody says like...
Well, and that's another reason, right, not to start too broadly, right, to make sure you can really start, crossing people off and making plans and things like that.
Yeah, because it's almost like online dating. If you like go on like 5 different dating sites at once and then suddenly you've got like 100 messages and you can't keep track of them, that's probably not like the best way to do this. You maybe want to start with like one option, reach out to 10 people, and then maybe a few of those agree to chat with you or have other ideas for you or whatever it is. And anytime someone is willing to talk with you, always ask them that last question of, is there anyone else you think I should talk to about this? Because that will get you a lot of great new suggestions, but then you've got to actually follow up. There's almost nothing worse than someone giving you that connection and then you just drop the ball on it. It makes you look really, really bad. So you want to be sure that you're actually very appreciative and following up with people.
Because that person will never help you again.
Right, exactly. Like if you want people to help you, you need to follow up on their suggestions. And then ideally, you need to circle back with them with appreciation and let them know that you actually did something with it.
Yes. Yeah, you should close the loop and make sure that they know.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, it could just be like, hey, Alison, that was so really great that you were able to connect me with your friend Sadie, and I had a conversation with her and she was super helpful. And I just wanted to let you know that I really appreciate that. Because then I'm going to be like, oh, great, and maybe we even talk about you in favorable ways behind your back and think of other ways we can help you, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And also with the follow-up, I think, once you've met with somebody, let's say that they gave you some suggestions and said on their side, oh, I'll get back to you about X, Y, or Z, and they don't, it's totally fine to follow up and say to them, oh, it was obviously you're going to thank them. And then, you had mentioned X, do you have any suggestions or whatever? That's fine.
Right.
People forget.
Yeah. And I think sometimes people, from the student side feel like either they're being annoying or they take it personally that they've been neglected because somebody hasn't followed up with them. But the reality is just, people are busy. Things fall through the cracks. And, reaching out politely just to say, hey, I know that we talked about meeting for a coffee and we haven't been able to set up a time. These are the times I would be free this week. Do any of these work for you? Is enough to get you back on that radar.
Definitely. And, there is a point where if someone's really not getting back to you, you don't want to be annoying.
Right, exactly.
And maybe you let that one go and you move on to your next connection. But I think it's fine to, follow up once or twice.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I think, some more advice that we had in this series I think is actually really useful is considering a tiered approach. And you could use this in terms of like actual job applications you're submitting, or I think you can use it for your networking. So, you can think of it by what you want to try first. So, based on what really excites you or what would be the ideal job or the ideal person to speak with. And then your second tier is kind of what comes next. Okay, those didn't really work out. So like, what are some other fields or jobs or people I'd like to talk with that I would be interested in, maybe not quite as excited about, but I'm still pretty psyched about. And then you get to that bottom level, which is like, what is not going to make you totally miserable? And what is your last ditch effort going to be? And we sometimes talk to people who really are in this scenario and, it can be hard. Because they've done a lot of work, they haven't really gotten results, the end of the year is approaching, or maybe they've set for the bar and they're waiting for their bar results, and they're really kind of desperate. And, that's not a great place to be, but it's also not the end of the world. I mean, I think you have to think of this first job really as a stepping stone, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think that, there is a point where you're at the end and you just need to find a job.
Right, you need something to do.
And we've specifically talked about this, at different like points. So if you're a 1L or a 2L or a 3L, it's different what that is, you know, and what you're really looking for. But there is a point in all of these places where you just need to find a job, any job. And, you know, I think like you said, it can be really hard psychologically to be there. And you're also trying not to put out that desperation to employers, even if it's what you feel. So you know, it is hard to kind of balance those two things, but absolutely it's your first job. Once you get past that, it's going to be easier to get the next one because you're going to have experience, you know, and you're going to do the best you can in it.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think of a friend of mine who's incredibly smart and talented, but for various reasons had gone to a law school that like wasn't that prestigious and wasn't in the area she wanted to work physically. And she was kind of banging her head against this wall because she had like very specific types of work she wanted to do in this specific area, but she eventually had to take a job that was kind of adjacent just to have something to do. But over the course of a couple of years, basically worked her way into this job that she really wanted because she was patient enough to keep applying for it, basically, and was then ultimately very successful there. So it's not that she didn't have the ability to be successful. It's just that she had this set of circumstances that were, for obvious reasons, making it harder for her to get what she wanted. But she kept plowing away at it and she got it.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's like, what do you really want? Right. You know, if that's really where you want to get to, there are probably ways to get there. It just not, you know, may not be the, you know, the straightest path. Yeah, and it's like, if you're at a lower ranked school, it may be hard to get into a big firm if that's what you want to do, but there are lots of ways to do it down the road.
Right.
It's just usually hard at the beginning. So once you have experience, there is a way to get there, maybe.
Yeah, and I think, you know, people who say, well, just not fair that I'm not getting these opportunities, that's probably true. But what that means is you have to really be the one out, like busting your butt and making sure that you're taking advantage of every opportunity to make yourself stand out and learn something. And, you know, eventually if you start showing up in court, for example, and like others people start to say like, hey, who's that kid? Like, he seems really smart. We should talk to him. And you're hustling, you know, everybody basically wants to employ someone like that. They just may not know about you immediately.
Absolutely. I think it's just, you know, about maybe you have to work a little harder.
Yeah, which is frankly not the end of the world. But it can be frustrating. So let's talk about that. I mean, you know, if you're in the middle of an extended search for a job, or maybe you found something, but it's really not something that you're that thrilled about, do you have any tips for kind of mental and emotional well-being at that state?
Well, I think some of it is probably taking a step back from it sometimes.
Yeah.
And being around people who are not in law school, are not lawyers, are not part of this, and remembering that there's a world outside of there.
Right.
I think it's actually a good thing.
And that actually you're in a pretty privileged position if you've graduated from law school and, you know, you've passed the bar exam. Because the worst case scenario, really, in that scenario, is you can always start your own practice.
Yes. You have options. You have skills. You know, I think that it can be really easy to get stuck inside, you know, your own specific situation on that day. Or
sometimes you're getting outside pressure from your family or whatever. Like, well, I don't understand. You know, you went to law school. Like, we spent all this money. Why do you not have a highly paid job? And that can be really hard for people.
Definitely. And I also think it can be hard just comparing yourself to other people. So if we're talking about you're looking for things outside OCI and you have a lot of friends who are just doing OCI and you think it seems so easy for them. First of all, it probably isn't super easy for them either. None of this is easy for anyone. But also you kind of need to focus on yourself, stay in your own lane, what you're doing, what your plan is, and not compare yourself to what everybody else is doing because you're not in their situation.
Yeah, and I think the reality is, even though it can seem difficult, having to do a lot of this introspective work and having to really go out and like find something actually can pay off in the end because you're likely to end up in something that's a better fit for you. And the reality is, I mean, you can look at these statistics. Most people who start as summer associates, they got a job at OCI, they summer at a firm, they take the offer, they are gone from that firm in 3 to 5 years. So it's not like they've solved their long-term problem anyway. And frankly, they were probably kind of miserable for a lot of that time. So, it's possible that you might actually find something that's a better fit over the long term and that makes you more likely to stay in the profession and have a satisfying career than if someone had just handed you one of these jobs to start with.
Absolutely. I think you're learning things and developing skills just through this process. So I think like just handling rejection and learning to network and putting yourself out there, those are all going to, be great for you long term.
These are good life skills. So if you're feeling sad and feeling sorry for yourself, just think, hey, I'm learning some life skills. I mean, easier said than done. I do think perspective can be really useful. I think you have to get very practical about this too. Make sure that you are taking care of yourself, that you're sleeping adequately, that you're eating adequately, that you're exercising adequately, that you're taking enough time off. It can be very challenging to think like, oh, I'm going to go watch a movie for 2 hours when you're thinking, I have to find a job. But that's really a marathon. It's not a sprint. You don't need to be doing like 10 hours a day of this every day. Doing something, even if it's 3 or 4 days a week, carving out 30 minutes or an hour and doing it consistently is going to pay off more than doing, panicking, trying to do a bunch of stuff at once, getting burned out, getting frustrated, dropping the ball. Like this is something you need to be doing fairly consistently. And I think it's going to be a lot easier to deal with.
Definitely.
And also coaching. I mean, they're career coaches. We can help you with this. If you do feel like you've hit a dead end and you're just not getting results, you're sending out your resume, you're getting nothing back, you're going on interviews, you're not getting offers, whatever. People have different issues here. There may be different challenges you're facing. So at some point, I think getting some outside help, whether it's your law school career services, who may have some resources, private career coaches, even just interviewing with friends, you got to have other people's feedback because you may not understand how you're coming across in a way that is preventing you from getting what you want.
Because I think there is a job out there that you're going to get if you keep at it.
Yeah.
And work on these things.
The reality is very few people who graduate from law school and pass the bar ultimately do not end up finding something that they can do in the legal profession or outside of it. You're typically not going to be totally unemployed. That just doesn't really happen.
Correct.
All right. Well, we're running out of time here. Any final thoughts on this?
My final thought is really kind of what we were talking about, staying organized and kind of giving yourself tasks to do. Because I think people, get kind of down about it and maybe you feel like you've gotten a lot of no's. And I think like having things on your list that you can actively do is going to make you feel like you're accomplishing something towards your goal, and having that always running. So you feel like, okay, I crossed some things off the list. I did some things today because there's always more. And, I think there's always going to be a time where you might feel like, you've hit the end of the road, but there really is no end of the road. You can always do more. You can always network more. You can always send out more resumes. Yeah. So I think it's important to kind of stick with it.
I think that's right. And you can give yourself very specific goals and they don't have to be super challenging. It could be, I'm going to reach out to 5 people on LinkedIn through my alumni network or whatever it is and just send them like a connection or a first request for like, hey, I exist. Or, not necessarily LinkedIn, but whatever. I mean, I have a guide on the Girl's Guide to doing informational interviews. So you might commit to setting up 1 informational interview a week. I mean, that doesn't sound that hard, does it? 1 a week, like you can do that. But that would mean huge progress. If you actually did that every week for a few months, you would be talking to so many people that could actually move you towards that goal.
Yeah, I think that there are little things you can do all the time to get yourself where you want to go.
Yeah, and focus on what you can do. I think that's a great point versus the results. Like you can't control whether somebody wants to do an interview with you, but you can control how many resumes you send out. So the more the things are under your control on an ongoing basis, I think the better you're going to feel about the process and also the more progress you're going to make. Well, with that, unfortunately, we are out of time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, you can check out careerdicta.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app because we would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon, and good luck with your job search.